Hello, welcome to the AfOx Graduate Admissions Q&A. My name is Maura. I am currently a D4 student in Human Geography at the University of Oxford. I am also a student engagement liaison at AfOx. So for those of you who are coming across the Africa Oxford Initiative for the first time, AfOx is a cross-university platform which aims to facilitate equitable research partnerships between researchers based at the University of Oxford, as well as researchers based in African institutions. So in recognizing that young people in Africa have the potential to play a key role in research and knowledge production all over the world, AfOx runs a number of events for prospective applicants as well as current students. And this graduate admissions live stream is one of those events. So today we hope to answer your questions about what I think is for many people quite a daunting application process to the University of Oxford. And to do that, we have a wonderful panel today who will be answering your questions. So before we begin, I would like to invite each member of the panel to introduce themselves and what it is that they do in Oxford. And I think we'll start with Nick.
So I'm Nick, I'm from the University's Central Graduate Admissions Office. So we handle applications to all 350 plus of the university's graduate courses and sort of answer your queries and that sort of thing. If you call someone to help with your application, you'll get us. So I'm just here today to answer your questions about the admissions process from that perspective.
Thank you, Nick. EJ?
I'm EJ Monagalland. I'm a professor of biodiversity in the zoology department here, and I supervise a lot of DPhil students, including from Africa.
Thank you, EJ. Daniel.
Hi, my name is Daniel Kandie. I'm a master's student studying an MSc in social data science and Oxford Africa Chairman's Standard Bank scholar. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you. Sandy?
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here and good to meet you. I'm a professor of law in the law faculty. I'm originally from South Africa. I supervise a lot of graduate students in law. A lot of them come from the global south, including places in Africa. I also teach on the taught master's course in law, which is called the BCL or the MJur. So I've got quite a wide experience, but only in law, I should stress.
Thank you, Sandy. And Murja?
Hi, everyone. My name is Murja. I am a postgraduate master's student studying public policy at the Blavatnik School. I just resumed Oxford around like 1 month ago, so the application procedure is all fresh in my memory, and I'm happy to sort of share my experience with everybody.
Thank you. We have one more panelist. I'm not sure if he's online, but Tatenda, who is an MSc African Studies alum, as well as a current MPP student and the Vice President of the Africa Society. So I'm sure he'll join us in a little bit, but in the meantime, we'll get started with questions. We'll begin with the questions that are about kind of the admissions criteria, very technical questions. I think we'll start with when do masters and DPhil applications open, and what are the important dates to keep in mind, Nick?
Sure. Right, so the admission cycle for a particular year, so for the year that you want to start studying, the admissions year will start the September before. So we're currently accepting applications to start next September and October, so for 2021-22 study. The main period for applications, it runs from now all the way through to January, which is when the major funding deadlines fall. So the big dates you really want to bear in mind are the January deadlines for your course. So we have one deadline on the 8th of January and one on the 22nd. Your course will only use one of those two January deadlines. So you need to really double check as soon as you can which those two deadlines is in use for your course and make sure you don't miss it. because that is going to be the final deadline for for your application to be eligible for funding, which is obviously really important for lots of students. We also recommend that you apply for the January deadline if you need a student visa, because that can take extra time. You don't want to end up running into problems at the start of the year. And also some courses do just close completely on the January deadline. That said, there are some courses that will stay open through to another March deadline, although obviously at that point you're not going to be eligible for funding if you apply unless there's specific scholarship that has a later deadline. And some courses will actually remain open all the way through to as late as August if they've still got places available or if new funding comes online. But generally speaking, you're thinking of most people are going to be applying for the January deadline for their course. And so you want to think of the end of the year really as being the point where you want to try and submit your application if you're applying for a January deadline, just to make sure that it's not too last minute and things don't get missed. And in terms of other big dates, the other thing I would keep in mind is the time frame for decision making, which we advise it basically normally takes 8 to 10 weeks after the deadline you apply to get your decision. If you submit your application now and you're applying for a January deadline, it's still going to take 8 to 10 weeks after the deadline. So it's not going to be 8 to 10 weeks from now, which sometimes people don't necessarily realize when they submit an application. So that time period sort of between late March and early April, that's really worth bearing in mind. That's when you're going to be expecting to hear back on your application. So those are the sort of the really main sort of milestones in the admissions year for Masters and DPhil applications both.
Thank you, Nick. I think on the point of avoiding last minute applications, I think this is a question that Daniel Murja or Tatenda can answer. How much time does the application take and how did you plan for the application process?
So I think I can start here. So for me, I looked at the application fairly early on. So my application deadline was January. I looked at it about early November there, looked at what I needed. The earliest thing I did was reach out to potential references. So past professors who could write for me a reference letter, I reached out to them very, very early on. And my rationale for that was that I wanted to, have a discussion with them, kind of tell them, for me, I looked at it not just asking them to write me a reference letter, but kind of sharing with them, what courses I want to apply for, why I want to do the application, and kind of my hopes in that way. I also sent them all a CV of mine, so they kind of have a good background to grow upon. So not just the classes they taught me, but they kind of get a whole picture of me as a student and my application. I did that about close to 2 months before and kind of gave them, a heads up on like when the deadline is, so that I make sure that they submit that fairly early on. And then for the personal statement and the other aspects of the application, I really started doing those. I started off very slowly, so I'd just like have a notebook. I'd jot down my ideas of, what I'd want to write in the personal statement, what I think would be useful. And then from there, I slowly built up into actually writing out the full personal statement as a Word document. So on my computer, and then just kept slowly refining that, editing that, sent it to a couple of close friends and, my family just to kind of have a look through it. The process takes a bit longer than you'd expect. And I think it's really a matter of getting your ideas down and refining it, and really also taking some time to reflect on why you want to do the course, how you think it's going to really benefit you, and also taking the time to really look at what the course entails. And that was a big aspect for me. Yeah.
Murja, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes, I would just like to reiterate that the application process varies for different individuals. And the reason I say there's sort of no time to sort of say how long it takes is because some of the elements of the application are things beyond your control. So just like Daniel was saying about the references, you could complete your application and then you don't have your referees send in the reference on time, and that might sort of delay the application process. So I would say to sort of keep an eye out for all of the factors that you might not have be able to control. Otherwise, I think that the application process is fairly straightforward. I think it just depends on whether or not you have all of the documents that is required of you, whether you've met the eligibility criteria. Otherwise, the process shouldn't, give or take 2 weeks, again, depending on certain factors that may not necessarily be in your control. Yeah.
Thank you. So someone has said that they're interested in doing an MBA and the MSc in African Studies, and they want to know whether the university still offers the double master's program. I think they're referring to the 1+1 program, and whether the application process is different from just doing one master's.
Right, so yeah, we do definitely still have the 1+1, and the MSc in African Studies is still part of the 1+1 program. Basically, all you do for that is you need to apply for both of those programs in the same cycle. So for the MBA and for the program at Oxford that you want to do. And then you'll notice on the Saïd Business School application for the MBA, there's just an option, the drop down to say that you want to do the 1+1. And then they'll marry up the applications. But that's basically all there is that's different to that process. It's just making sure you get both applications in at once. So they don't use the same application process or software. The Saïd Business School has its own application process separately from all the other graduate courses. So just make sure that you're doing both those applications at once if you want to do the 1+1.
So the next questions are about the different scores that you need to gain admission. So about the IELTS scores and whether students from English-speaking countries are required to provide those scores, or whether a waiver could be provided.
Sure. So basically, there's sort of 3 tiers to proving your English proficiency. There is a sort of blanket waiver. You don't need to either request a waiver or submit scores if you are from, well, if your first language is English and you're from one of a list of countries defined by the UK Home Office as being majority English speaking. Right. The bad news here is that there aren't any African countries on that list at the moment, unfortunately. So unfortunately, that's not a possibility if you're applying from Africa. However, there are, so the other 2 options are to submit IELTS or TOEFL or to request a waiver. And you can request a waiver as long as you've done a university course of at least 9 months full time at an institution where all of your instruction and assessment was entirely in English. So that's more likely to be a possibility. And the process of requesting a waiver, we've actually simplified it this year, and it just consists of ticking yes on the form to certify that you meet those requirements for a waiver. And then the department will assess your request when they assess your application. But it's very straightforward this year.
And another question for you, Nick, is for those who are applying for the next academic year, do they need TOEFL or GRE or GMAT scores in order to apply?
Sure. So you may need a TOEFL or IELTS or another acceptable English language test, depending on whether you meet the conditions for a waiver. GMAT it's very rare that a course requires GMAT, apart from the Saïd Business School. So the Saïd Business School has a separate process, and they do ask you to submit GMAT for the MBA, for example. And they have some advice on what a competitive score is on their website. So definitely check that out if you're thinking about the MBA or other business school programs. It's not a standard thing you'd submit for a different sort of graduate program at Oxford. GRE, again, there are some courses that either require it or encourage you to submit it. It will say in the entry requirements for that course if you need to. There aren't that many courses that fall into that category, but specifically economics and courses related to economics at Oxford will often ask applicants for GRE. So make sure that you double check whether your course requires it, but it is the minority.
And there's a question about grades. So does the University of Oxford accept an upper second degree for admittance into a master's program?
This is going to be another one of those annoying varies by course answers. There are a lot of courses at Oxford that do accept a minimum of a good upper second class as a basis for a competitive application. Again, you can see that in the entry requirements of the course, but some courses do require that you have a first to apply. So that will always state that on the course page. And obviously, even if a course will consider you with a high 2-1, it may be that the average grade is higher, that the average grade of accepted applicants is a first. We've invited departments to put on their course page if that's the case for the course. They can say this course is very competitive and most applicants will have a first. So you can rely on what's in the entry requirements from that perspective. But yeah, the short answer is yes, you can apply with the good 2-1 unless the course requires a first, which is the minority of courses right now.
I think, Nick, you could probably answer this question, but EJ and Sandy, I wonder if you'd have some advice as well. But apart from academic achievements and grades, what are other things needed for a graduate admission into the University of Oxford? So I guess what other things would you be looking at for in an application?
So maybe I can give a bit of a general answer, and then maybe our academics can give more information on their areas, because as we say again, it does vary a lot by course area. The only thing I was going to highlight more generally is that obviously for PhD, basically that you do need, as well as having good qualifications, you need to have a really good research fit. There needs to be suitable supervision available at the university, and you could be extremely qualified, and if your research interests don't match with supervisors at Oxford, then it wouldn't be a great application still. So that is very important for research programs. But I should hand over to our other speakers.
So certainly in my area, it's useful to show that you have a passion for the subject. And I think that's probably true in most things for masters as well. So obviously people's opportunities vary a lot, but even if you don't have much opportunity, you can still show that you have read outside of your academic subject. Perhaps you've volunteered, you've taken all the opportunities in your undergraduate to do things that are extracurricular, just to show that you really, really care about the topic, I think is important.
So in my subject, which is law, I would definitely endorse the passion for the subject, but also there are opportunities to have practical experience. So students who, after they've graduated, have gone on and done something in practice, either working for civil society organizations, perhaps in legal practice of some sort, which is relevant to their field, or on a local or national, international level, that's helpful. It's also helpful if you do have some publications of some sort, even if they are small publications, maybe blogs or op-eds in newspapers, that kind of thing, which shows that you have really not just have a passion, but have really engaged and attempted to widen your experience before you immerse yourself again in academics.
Thank you. I think perhaps things like the application is an opportunity to demonstrate that. So I guess a follow-up question would be, what is expected out of the academic essay, the personal statement, and for those courses that have admissions interviews, those as well. And please, for the current students, feel free to kind of contribute about what your own experience of putting together those documents has been.
I don't think there's actually anything I could say generically for courses, because it's always so specific. Perhaps some or other people can speak to their particular areas.
Let's let the students speak about their experience first, and then we can come
in. So my experience when I was trying to write the personal statements and the academic writing was, for the personal statement, I really needed to emphasize that what I was trying to do with my personal statement was to let the reader sort of get off knowing, just like our other speakers have said, that I was passionate about what I was applying for. And then I tried to not, sort of give a very generic answer to the questions. I made sure that it was sort of things that really applied to me as a person. And I sort of made sure to emphasize the reason why I was coming into this, what I hope to gain, what I could even add in value to the program itself. So it was just an opportunity for the reader to sort of get to know me. And I mean, for the academic essays, I mean, the difference, of course, between writing just, an opinion piece and an academic essay is, to make sure that the ideas you're passing across are well thought out. So what is the message for the academic pieces? I was constantly thinking, like, what is the message I'm trying to get across? How is this unique to my situation? Was I really writing something that every other person would just write, or was I actually engaging in the situations that, things that were happening around me, and sort of translating that into the reason why I wanted to come into Oxford. So for me, it was basic things like the clarity. Did I really do well in my referencing? And just generally, again, trying to pass on a message. And so that when the assessors were done reading my work, that they had an idea of, it was as if they had just spoken to me. So they knew who I was, they knew what my values were, they knew what I was interested in, why I was trying to get into the program, how important it was for me to get into the program. So it was just all of these things that I was thinking about when I was trying to put my documents together.
I know that from the MPP, if I'm correct, you had to write the academic pieces, but for Daniel, who's doing the social data science, how did you go about submitting your academic writing pieces? Were they things that you'd written for previous degrees, or did you write something from scratch?
So in terms of the academic pieces of writing, what I did is I looked at what I had written before, so kind of existing pieces of work, and I kind of filtered them out to try and see if there's something that I had which related to the course, and also, of course, something that a piece of work that I was proud of, that I'd done quite well in, and that I thought could kind of showcase how I how I can do like some academic writing. Now the limit is, I believe for me, it was about 2,000 words. So I was able to actually cut out a piece from my undergraduate thesis. So I cut out simply the abstract and the literature review and part of the introductory like data analysis section. Those are the sections which I thought were most important for towards this course in particular, and I managed to make sure that fits within the word count. I believe it may vary by course, but I know definitely for my course, this on the website, it says, on the application website, it does mention that you are able to add in an excerpt from a longer piece of work. And I would say that that's definitely a good way to go. The benefit of using something pre-existing is I didn't have to start thinking about, oh, what am I going to write? What should I do? And that kind of released a lot of the pressure in terms of the whole application. Yeah.
Great. I wonder if Ija and Sandy, whether you could say something about, from your perspective, what stands out in students' applications.
So I think, like Sandy said, having some experience, having gone out and got that experience is important. I've read a lot of personal statements, and my field is conservation. So the ones that I don't like so much start with, I've wanted to save the planet since I was 3 years old. I had a pet woodlouse. So try to think of something that is more meaty, more concrete, that actually demonstrates the expertise that you have and how you want to deploy it in your future career, that shows that you've really thought about it, rather than just having something that's trying to catch our attention by being too personal. Personally, I don't like those very personal ones. I also think it's worth saying that for the DPhil, it's quite a different process, a very different process than for the masters. And for a DPhil, you're able to contact your supervisor to start with, your prospective supervisor. And so how you kind of sell yourself comes from that very first email that you send to the prospective supervisor. And that is sort of your first chance to impress. So you just think from the point of view as a supervisor, I must get, 10 people writing me an email every week asking to be my student. Couldn't possibly take all of those. The ones who just write a very short email that isn't very grammatical, that doesn't have the CV, that shows that it's just, they've written 100 of those to lots of people, I'm not going to be impressed by that. I'll be impressed by one that is targeted, organized, has the CV, explains why they think that I'm a good supervisor, explains, you know, the thought process that they've gone through. Those are the ones that impress me, and then I might answer. And once the supervisor has answered, you can start to engage with them about how to go forward with your application.
Yeah, I would endorse everything that's been said. I firstly want to endorse what Moore just said about making your personal statement about yourself and not just use generic things that you think the supervisor or those judging your application want to hear, because that always comes across. You can always tell that there are some stock phrases, which, as EJ said, you just see in lots of applications. So it's quite clear that this is what somebody was coached to say. So don't say those. The other thing is, don't say I'm the best student ever or something of that nature. It's surprising how some students think they really have to talk themselves up, but don't do that. Just say what you've done, what you think, what you're interested in, and leave the judgment about your merits to the person reading the application. So I think that is another stock phrase that sometimes people seem to pick up from somewhere, because you see it often. Either I'm totally passionate about this, or I'm an excellent candidate for your course. That's not for you to say, and it really doesn't come across as sincere. The other thing I would say is, particularly students from different parts of Africa, you should explain something about the course that you've taken, the grading structure, where you came in the class, because you would be surprised, and Nick might say more about this too, but you would be surprised that there isn't that much understanding of different systems from different countries. And I think that's quite an important barrier for students coming from the global south and from different parts of Africa, in that their career or their academic trajectory isn't the same, or doesn't look the same as students with whom, say, the Oxford Law faculty or other faculties are familiar with. So although there are kind of conversion tables and things, some universities give lots of firsts and some give very few firsts. So the answer to the upper second question is, sometimes you might, although you've got an upper second, still have come within the top few from your class, just because the university that you go to doesn't award distinctions or first class grades easily, or not easily, but along the same criteria as other universities. So we know, and Nick again could talk about this, that American undergraduate colleges and universities and school students tend to have much higher grades, and that we have to adjust things to compare with, say, some of the English universities in European. But I think my experience, certainly of universities from different parts of Africa, is that they are sometimes stricter about their criteria for awarding top grades. So I would suggest that candidates say something in their statement about, these are the courses I did, I came here in the class, in the top one, and then your upper second will be put into context. If you've got any prizes, you should say so. So you shouldn't talk yourself up in the sense of saying, I'm great, but you should show what you've done, which highlight the things that you've done, so that somebody who's unfamiliar with the structures in your country will recognize you as being a very highly meritorious candidate. So that would be my advice.
Just I might add something on the international qualifications point, which is that this is reasonably new in Oxford Town. It's only been about 2 or 3 years that we've published basically some sort of guidelines on entry requirements in other countries' systems, which you can find on the graduate admissions website. And there are some of it's basically, at the moment, it's only about 30 countries. It's countries we get the most applications from, just because that way it covers more applicants. But we've worked with Africa Oxford Initiative actually on developing some of the guidance on there. So yeah, you can find them, for example, for Nigeria, South Africa, and a few other African countries on there if you want to have a quick look at the guidance. But obviously, it is, as you say, like it can be it's by institution. It can vary a lot, grading. So if you have any with your transcript, I think this is quite useful advice I want to give to more people this year. If your transcript have a paper one that's got material on the back, or you've got like an online one which has a page of reference material about grades, you should include that. So obviously you'll be familiar with it, but your assessor might find that useful, basically. I mean, there's no harm in including the extra page or scanning the back if there's more information there. So do include that if you have it.
Great, thank you. I think, EJ, you mentioned DPhils earlier, and we got quite a few questions about people who want to apply for DPhils. I think the first question is, you spoke about contacting a supervisor. Someone asked that, is it necessary to already have a supervisor when applying to a DPhil, and whether they should, I mean, you spoke about this a little bit, whether they should contact potential supervisors or heads of departments before they apply. And I think another question is about proposals and what the weight is of research proposals relative to, I guess, academic record and grades.
Yeah, so in terms of contacting someone, it does depend whether you're going to go on a doctoral training program or a CDT, or whether you want to do a kind of individual bespoke DPhil. So if you want to go onto the doctoral training program or a CDT, then you should follow the rules for them, and they're a little bit more like the master's rules, and for each one it'll be slightly different in terms of whether you should contact a supervisor beforehand or not, and there'll be guidance on their websites. Like I said, if you want to do a kind of bespoke one, so it's just a standard DPhil within a department, then it's good practice to contact a suggested supervisor beforehand. And they can give you some advice about the extent to which you're competitive. They can give you some advice about potentially whether you should do a master's first or what you could do to improve your CV. They can also help you to think about where your research might fit into their research program. What was the rest of the question? Sorry. You're muted.
It was about the weighting of the different parts of the application, the research proposal versus the academic record and grades, and how that's considered in the application. Research
proposal is important, and it's sort of equivalent to the writing task that you get for the masters. Usually it's just 1 or 2 pages, and it's a chance to show that you're capable of formulating a research plan. And so it's something that you should really think hard about. And sometimes the prospective supervisor would be prepared to look over the research proposal for you and give you some tips before you apply. But other times the prospective supervisor would see that as a bit of the test. It's a test for you to show that you're capable of thinking in a logical way. And so they'd rather not look over it for you. But yeah, you'll get some advice if you contact them.
On both those questions, again, candidates should be aware that different faculties and departments differ from each other. What I would say about law is we have an admissions process, and although it's good to know what supervisors are there and what areas of expertise they have, you don't have to have necessarily contacted a supervisor ahead of time. In fact, I sometimes feel that it's a more level playing field if I deal with the applications that come in through the application process rather than students contacting me individually. So in that sense, I think in law, it isn't a requirement that you have contacted a supervisor ahead of time. But as I think Maura or maybe Nick said at the beginning, you could have an excellent CV and application, but if there is no one in the faculty with expertise, then you may not get a place on a DPhil just because there isn't a supervisor not because you don't have merit. So it is really worthwhile immersing yourself in who are members of the faculty, what their expertise is, and knowing that you have perhaps one or two potential supervisors in mind when you are drawing up your proposal. On the second question on the balance, I agree with EJ that it's both of them are important. You do want to show that you can write a reasonably good proposal, that it's thoughtful, that you've looked at the what has already been done in the field, that you know what your methodology is, you have a good sense of your research question. But also to bear in mind that most, and I'm sure the students here on this call would say the same if you're doing a doctorate, many students reformulate their proposals quite substantially within the first few months in conversation with the supervisor. So the proposal isn't necessarily the be-all end-all of your future research, but what it does show, as EJ said, that you've thought about research, you are able to put your ideas together in a coherent, logical, and well-researched way, and that you are passionate about it. So that's what I always say to students, come back to the passionate point. For a doctorate, you have to be passionate about what you're proposing so that you can really just immerse yourself in it for 3 whole years at least.
And I think one more question for Nick about the DPhil. So someone asked, said they're interested in doing a DPhil in area studies. They've done an MSc somewhere else. Can they apply straight for the DPhil, or do they have to do the MSc in African studies before they could do the DPhil in area studies specializing in Africa?
So obviously, so every course can set out its own entry requirements, but we don't have any courses that require you to have done the masters at Oxford, and apart from courses where you apply for a combined masters and doctorate. So as long as the course you've done matches the subject area requirement, which obviously it seems very likely to in the situation that you gave, so you don't have to have done a masters at Oxford to do a PhD at Oxford, even though obviously lots of our master's students do go on to do our PhDs, our DPhils.
And on the, you could, if you're doing a DPhil, you could get help potentially from a potential supervisor. But I just wanted to ask the tender to talk a little bit about AfOx and the mentoring scheme, because someone did ask the question: can current students in the program help in the application process?
Thanks, Maura. So yeah, current students can definitely help you apply, but by help, I mean help not do the application for you. So as AfriSoc at the moment, we are actually recruiting prospective applicants for our mentorship scheme, so that if you get into this scheme, then we're going to pair you with a current Oxford student who will then help you with the application process, which includes proofreading some of your your submitted materials, including personal statements. But just as a keynote is the weight of the application will be on the applicant. The mentor will just provide you with the guidelines, because I'm sure, as most of my colleagues here would admit, that Oxford can be a pretty intense place, that for somebody to do the application for you would or is probably most likely impossible. But we'll definitely just do within the limits of the time that we have to try and read your submitted materials and see how you can improve. And most of the advice is all in this room, from probably people, not probably from certainly people more qualified than me, or like to comment on personal statements. So this would be a very good start. And then as AfriSoc, what we were just merely doing is to provide to stand as a leaning tower, so that when you're applying to Oxford, you don't feel like you are inadequate, just to provide enough moral basis. And it's the least we can do. But at the moment, if you go on our AfriSoc Twitter page, Instagram, and Facebook pages, we have already sent out the calls for mentees. You just go on our AfriSoc pages. There's a call for mentees and there's a call for mentors, and we're going to try and pair those in the next coming 2 weeks. So just go and apply, and we will try our best to help. Thank you so much.
Great, yes. So I think if you look up Oxford University Africa Society, you'll be able to find all the social media pages and the websites. So I think the next questions are a lot of it about funding. I think I'll start with quite a broad question about what scholarship and funding options are available, and how can students explore them and what they're eligible for. And then for the current students, maybe you could speak a little bit about what your experience with trying to find funding has been, and whether you have any tips for how to navigate that. I think perhaps Nick, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I can definitely fill you on the general funding situation, which is so obviously we have a section of the website for graduate funding. The vast majority of our scholarships, the centrally awarded scholarships, are automatic eligibility, which means that when you apply, basically you'll be put forward for anything you're eligible for. So that means you don't need to look through a whole list of things and pick them. You can be awarded funding without specifying a particular scholarship. But we do have, there are still some funds, some scholarships where you do need to do something else. And there's a tool called the Funding Search, where you can plug in the course you're applying to, the country that you live in, that sort of thing, and it will narrow down the list of those scholarships and show you any that you might be eligible for. And those are ones where you may have to submit an extra document, for example, or there are some rare cases where you have to pick a particular college, but normally you don't need to pick a particular college to get a scholarship awarded by that college. If you were awarded it, you'd be moved to that college. So basically the graduate funding website is absolutely the best place to start with that, and definitely take advantage of the funding search. Do start your looking for funding as early as you can. I know often people ask, oh, can you start to look after you've got an offer? But you definitely shouldn't leave it that late. I mean, it's definitely the sooner the better. Even if more options come online whilst you're looking, it's still really guided to start early to get a picture of what options you've got.
I think before we move on to the current students, Nick, just a follow-up question. Someone had asked about age limits and restrictions, and whether this is a 43-year-old woman who would like to apply, and asked whether that was allowed, like, for admission, and whether there was an age limit for the funding. I know that for external scholarships there might be age restrictions, but for kind of the automatic application scholarship, is there an age limit?
Sure. I'm not aware of any university scholarships that have an age limit. I couldn't. There are up to 1,000 scholarships which are awarded every year. So I couldn't promise that for all the schemes, but I'm almost certain that none of them do. I know that Rhodes, for example, as an external scheme, does have an upper age limit. It's not that common for scholarships to have an upper age limit, though. And in terms of your admissions process, which you said, I know they asked about as well, age definitely isn't a factor. But obviously, the length of time that's passed since your last university qualification might be a factor, which is something you've got to consider. Like, can you still get good references? No, your referee is going to remember you. As if it's been 15 or 20 years, that would be a problem, because you need, for a competitive application, you do need to have your referees, and you do need to have like all the parts of your application still in place. But if you've done, obviously, if you're 43 and you've just done your undergraduate, then that's perfect. You've still got access to all of that. It's not age, it is just how long you leave it before you come back to postgraduate study. But obviously it is very common to work and then come back to postgraduate study. Short periods of time aren't really a problem, but if we're talking much longer periods and your referees might not remember you, then that does become a problem. But generally speaking, age isn't a barrier here.
I just add one thing, which is that in certain fields, like my field, not all the scholarships are on the Oxford funding thing, because there are scholarships all over the place. So there are scholarships in your own country, there's scholarships from philanthropic foundations, there are, so there's a number of different scholarships, and I would really echo the start early. So for me, thinking about your funding is one of the very first things you should be doing, just as Daniel was saying about the referees, because certainly when people contact me, if they don't have a plan for funding, then they're not going to go very far.
Finally, Morja, Daniel, or Tatenda, if you have anything to say about looking for funding and applying for funding.
In my case, I was fortunate to get Rhodes Scholarship before I was admitted, but like Nick said, I was aware that most scholarships at Oxford are automatic enrollment. Sort of, they like if you get enrollment, like in most cases, it comes with a scholarship. So because I was aware of that, I just like made sure that I put in my application a bit earlier for my first program. So I was just like trying to capitalize on that. But I was quite fortunate to get like a different scholarship before it got to that stage. But yeah, like everyone else has been saying, I think the best way to start thinking of Oxford is to think of the funding first and the program. It's not just, like the issue of admission, because there's nothing more painful than, getting admitted and not getting the funding. So I think just thinking of those as more of, like the right shoe and the left shoe, that would probably help you to know that you need to wear them both at the same time.
Just to add to what Tatenda has said, my funding came from my home country, which is Nigeria. And in as much as I would want to echo that you should always think of funding before you apply, just because again, it's quite heartbreaking for you to get admission and then not be able to get funding. At the same time, I think sometimes, just like Nick has said, some of this funding is automatically sort of considered alongside your application. But what is very important is definitely to start to look at the options available even before you apply, because my scholarship, for example, required me to have some prerequisite, I had to undergo some sort of exercise before I had even completed my application to come into Oxford. And then when I got into Oxford, it was sort of further considered. So for example, of course, the Chevening Scholarship, the Commonwealth Scholarships, all of those have like early closing dates, even before the application dates, deadlines for courses in Oxford. So you need to be sort of mindful of those deadlines. And even for my department, for example, I eventually found out that I was late. So there were more options for funding open to me if only I had applied sort of earlier, because some of these fundings do close before deadline for the application of your courses. So I think it's really important to sort of jump on the offer right now and start to look at, what funding options are available. And I think one of the things really that I know I was worried about was, the fees were so much. Would I really be able to afford it even if I didn't get funding? But just like I think it was EJ that was saying, there's a lot of funding in Oxford. There's like a lot of different avenues and opportunities for you to get funding for your education in Oxford. So I don't think that should sort of stop you from applying. I would encourage that you apply. Then alongside, just try and monitor the process and make sure you're in touch with like the deadlines for all the different applications that are available. And I would strongly recommend, just as Nick said, going onto the Oxford website and sort of streamlining, trying to narrow down which scholarships you're eligible for. I think it's very important to start right now so you don't miss out on the deadlines.
I think just to echo that, I think it's very important to start early to put your best foot forward, but do this optimistically as well. So there are various, so there'll be scholarships within Oxford that, you can be automatically eligible for. And a lot of those, as it said, if you submit your application by the relevant January deadlines, you're going to be automatically considered for them. And your application, for the application that you submit for your course, is going to be reviewed for those scholarships. So I'd say that's one key aspect that you want to keep in mind. And you have to, I'd say it's very important to make sure that, you submit your application early on. I know for most master's programs, the closing date for the application itself is that January deadline. So really it's a matter of just, you have to submit your application to the university on time. I think for DPhil programs or PhD programs, there's sometimes some flexibility in that. And I guess that's program specific. that they have different deadlines. So that's where, you know, you have to now be careful to make sure you submit it early on so that you can still be eligible for those. And then aside from that, there's also the external funding opportunities. So I know there's World Bank scholarships, there's the Chevening scholarship. As Tatenda mentioned, there's the Rhodes scholarship as well. And these are now external scholarships that you can apply for. I find that a lot of these actually still have quite early deadlines. So I know sometimes the deadlines are as early as October. So these are things which you want to make sure, you know, you look at very, very early in advance. Sometimes it's the case that, you know, you have to submit your application for the scholarship before you even submit your application to the university, simply because of a matter of when they're due, right? So some scholarships might be due before, you know, the deadline for your application to the university is due. Of course, these will, you know, even themselves out, as, you know, you'll only be able to get the scholarship if you get into the university, right? But again, it's really a matter of trying to submit your application on time and then be optimistic. I know in my case, the Standard Bank Chairman Scholarship was only awarded I was automatically considered after submitting in my application to the university. So that's how I got shortlisted for the scholarship. And then from there was an interview process that I went into. However, that interview process was much later after, you know, I'd already even gotten accepted to the university and accepted for the course. So there's still those opportunities that can come up like that. One thing that I would say to watch out for is that, as Nick mentioned, there's some scholarships that you need to submit a separate application for. So even within Oxford, as you're submitting in your Oxford application, this is one of the things that, you know, you have to look very carefully through it. I know it's usually on the last step just before submitting. Sometimes the scholarship, if they would ask you if you would like to also apply for, you know, submit an application for this and this scholarship. And if you click yes, there might be a drop-down menu that says, okay, submit this personal statement. So those are things which I'd say the earlier you start on your application and look through every step so that you know exactly what needs to be submitted, the better it is. Sometimes I've had friends who are trying to apply and then they realize that, you know, they're submitting the application on the last day, and then they realize that there's this other scholarship that they're able to apply for, but it needs, you know, a 500-word essay, right? And then you're now rushing for time trying to get that essay done. So I'd say these are things which, you know, really, if you can, submitting in your application as early as possible really, really helps. And just kind of making sure you're on top of things. If you can, just get like a notebook, write down a checklist of all the things you need. So, you know, reference letters, who could potentially give you a reference form. Make sure you reach out to them early, and then, you know, as you're getting close to the deadline, if they haven't submitted in their reference, you know, send them reminders and things like this, just to make sure that everything is done on time. And I think that really, it helps a lot to be able to have things done early on and not have them rushed. I'm not sure from the admission side of things, but I think that, you know, a well thought out application will look much better than one that is simply rushed through. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think Sandy will have to leave us soon, but before you go, Sandy, do you have any kind of final top tips for students?
Yes, I want to be very encouraging. I want to say, please apply. Please, certainly in my faculty in law, please apply. Please have the confidence that you're definitely good enough, but do spend the time making sure that comes across. So everything that's been said about putting the time into your application, thinking carefully about your referees, talking to referees, finding out about the institution and the department that you're applying to, and writing your application carefully. But again, and I couldn't stress more, you really should stress what might be obvious to you but might not be obvious to those who are judging your application. The difference in as as it were, grading structure or the academic progression structure from your institution. But please apply and please feel confident and I think, as Daniel said, come, you know, with a very enthusiastic and self-confident approach to this. And I hope we see lots of applications from all of you.
Thank you very much, Sandy. I think before we get final top tips from everybody else, spend some time talking about colleges, which is something that makes Oxford quite different from a lot of other universities in the world. So I think there was a question about when applying for a course, does one need to indicate which college they'd like to be in? And I think, Nick, you might answer that, but I think it might also be useful to talk about what is a college and how does that fit into the university and departments, etc.
Yeah, what is a college? It's a difficult question. Hoping that some of the students might help me with this one. I've been writing an article about it and staring at the question, what is a college, for a while. Obviously, we have people sort of knowing that we have I think it's about, so we have a new college as well now. I just keep getting the number wrong. But I believe we have like over 40 colleges, and also including some permanent private halls, which are smaller and sometimes focus on particular religions. But basically, what they basically are is two things, which is a community, which is usually interdisciplinary, and also a set of buildings, which can be like all sorts and normally many different architectural styles, all sorts, all sizes. But they'll often have like a hall where people can eat together. They'll often have accommodation where students can stay either sort of at a main site, sort of a fancy looking one in the middle of the town centre, or sort of spread out all across the city. And they'll often have other facilities like sports facilities, social gatherings, that sort of thing. But again, every college definitely has its own character at Oxford, and each one definitely has its own facilities, strengths. They'll often have sort of small grants and bursaries for different things, like for travel, for example, or book grants, and that can vary a lot by colleges. These are all sort of small advantages of particular colleges. So there's a lot of sort of small differences, but I do think, I mean, maybe the students would disagree with me. I do think they have more in common than they do differences if you look at them, like if you look at all of them together. But yeah, essentially it is like, it's your own sort of interdisciplinary community, your own set of people, which is outside of your cohort on your course. And I do think that's that's a really sort of unique part of the college part of Oxford. And I do think that's a really nice and a really sort of community building part of it, being able to meet people who aren't from your course, and not just be with people who are learning exactly the same thing as you, which obviously is great, and that's a great reason to come to university. But it can be really useful to talk to people who are working on perhaps even on quite a similar topic, but in a completely different department, and not always useful, but certainly interesting. And I hope the students agree with me, but I'll wait and see.
I think EJ, I think two questions for you. Do lectures take place in colleges or in departments for postgraduate students? And if someone's applying for a DPhil, do they have to pick the college where their potential supervisor is a fellow?
So first of all, I just echo what Nick says. Colleges do vary, and you don't have to put a college down on your application. If you don't put a college down, then you'll get assigned one. And like Nick said, also, if there's a scholarship that's attached to a particular college that you get put in that, or you get the option to go to that college and take up that scholarship. It is really worth thinking about your college. Many of my graduate students don't really realise until it's too late that it matters what college they put down. As Nick says, there's more in common with colleges than that's different, and I don't think you'll have a bad experience in any college, but the flavour of your Oxford experience is affected by your college. And so it's really important to talk to current students. People like, I guess Tadenda probably would give some advice to people if they wanted about which colleges give different things. So certainly in my field, where there's fieldwork money, some colleges give more fieldwork money than others. Where you live will vary with the colleges. whether you have a chance to live in town or whether you could live out. There are quite a few variations, and so it is worth trying to choose a college that's suitable for you and not just put a blank, any college will do. If you get accepted by the department, then there will be a process by which you get accepted by a college. I mean, don't worry about the fact that about the college end of it. I think that's something that will get sorted out for you. So you apply to your department, and then you either get your college that you've chosen, or you'll get kind of pushed into another college. And you don't have to go to the same college as your supervisor. It can be useful because you know, your supervisor knows how the college rules work. The supervisor will know where all the bits of money are, you know, but it doesn't really matter. Choose your college that you want, and it might be nice to have a bit of distance from your supervisor. One way or another, you'll be given a college pastoral tutor who is a member of staff in that college, who has kind of who cares for you and looks after you and gives you lunch once a week, once a term, and that kind of thing. So you will get some college support one way or another. But I'll be interested to hear what the students think about the college experience.
Yes, please. I think if each of you could talk about how you went about choosing your college, and maybe which college you're in and how you're finding that experience. Can we start with Tatenda?
Yeah, sure. So in my case, I chose Lineker because they have the best gym. Because I wasn't informed enough. Thank you so much. But yeah, definitely a college matters, and it's worth putting like deep thought into it. It's like you know, as EJ said, it's sort of like it adds the flavor to your Oxford experience. For me, I was lucky enough that being a Rhodes Scholar, you have like all of your expenses paid for. But for somebody who's doing, like, for example, a DPhil, you like need additional funding probably constantly. You would want to consider a college that is like some very good amounts in their academic grants, because they are also like important as part of your academic experience. You wouldn't want to be like working on your thesis and at the same time stressing about where are you going to get the funding to go and present your paper in Germany or something. So it's also important to think about that. Like for most of us as master's students, once you have like your expenses paid for, yeah, which college you're at wouldn't make much of a difference, because you know, like we don't have like those many cases where you have to be like, oh, I have to go and present these or that. But it's different with like a DPhil student. I've talked to a few colleagues who have mentioned that. But it's worth thinking about which college you would want, because I think most colleges, they actually have different variations about like, you know, like even their backgrounds, how many nationalities are represented, etc, etc. It's worth thinking about, okay, which experience would I want to have? I'm from Africa. I wouldn't want to just go and be with like, you know, like my fellow Africans. I'm not saying it's bad, but Oxford is a rich place. You would want to go and expose yourself, get out of your comfort zone for a little while, and, you know, like experience what other people, like different cultures, different like peoples, different nationalities, and, you know, like just push yourself out of your comfort zone. It's actually good that way. But don't just think of it as in form of like just a community, but also think about it in the academic sense. You know, like thinking about, okay, which funding opportunities would I have access to in the forms of hardship? For example, this is during like COVID. We don't know when this is going to end. In the case that you hit rock bottom, is your college, the college that you're applying for, going to be, you know, like capable of being there for you enough so that you complete your studies? It's also critical to think about that.
Thank you. Morjan?
I think most of the things that I had in mind has been said, but I am in Harris Manchester College, which is one of the newer colleges in Oxford. And that's one of the interesting things. I was really fascinated by the collegiate system here in Oxford. I mean, you've got colleges here that have been established since like the 17th century, and it's just a very interesting system that they have. And so I didn't pick a college when I was applying, so a college was assigned to me. But I think it is actually very important, just for the reasons that every other person has said, about giving your college some thought, because there are benefits. You need a college sort of that might align with your interest. You need to also check the location. You need to know what your college is offering. My college is catered for example. You have colleges that feed the students. You have colleges where you're an adult, you're independent. My college is one that has just mature students, so students over the age of 21. And you have like colleges that have all of these different values and different system. So I think it's really important, not so that I don't repeat what every other person has said, but I think it's really important that you sort of give your college a bit of thought when applying. I mean, you could leave it open as well. Doesn't mean you're going to get the worst college. My college is really great, and it still maintains some of the traditions, like the old Oxford traditions, like having 2 formal dinners every week, which is a great way to meet like the people in my community. And then you have so many other events that your college, sort of organizes every now and then. I mean, with COVID, it's now a bit more restricted, but I think it's really important. The collegiate system is really part of the Oxford experience. So I would encourage everybody to give it like a bit of thought. And then all the websites, all the colleges have websites. So you can always just go there and, check the information, try and speak to current students and just see, just identify the colleges that you think align with your interests. If you're someone that is into architecture, if you're into, if you have interest in doing research, my college, for example, has like research institutes in law, in politics and philosophy. So, if I was doing one of those things, it would be really easy for me to, for example, get support and funding and, just to be a part of, something that is already established. So I think it's really important to pay attention really to the college that you choose.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot said. I'm not sure how much I can add to that. But for myself, when I was looking at the colleges, it's something which I wish I had put a bit more focus on initially. I think that looking at a college, it can be tied to what you're studying, but it can also be it's also a big social aspect about your experience at Oxford. So I wouldn't say that any college is bad per se. I think all the colleges are good. It just, each college has a different flavor and, a different kind of character. So some colleges only accept graduate students. So you can expect that, when you go to such a college, a lot of the people there will be a bit much older. You'll have potentially a slightly smaller college, smaller number of people within the college. Whereas other colleges such as mine, Wadham, we have both undergraduate and graduate students. So in that way, it's a slightly bigger college, I'd say, compared to some. But I like the fact that, I can actually talk to some undergrads and see, and kind of understand what their experience at Oxford is like. Of course, it's a bit more challenging now with COVID, but it's your college becomes to me, it feels like my social home, kind of within Oxford, right? So I have my department, and that's where I do all my learning. I do all my coursework. We have the department, like the department offices and all that, and that's separate from now where my college is. And now within the college, there are a couple of social events that they hold. I think you can be more, you decide how involved you want to be within your college. So you can take part in many of the different social events. They have different clubs. I know they have a rugby team. It's a bit challenging, of course, with COVID, but in lieu of that, that's something that you can join. That's something that you can take part in. And that kind of adds to your overall experience here at Oxford, right? So I think it's important to look at it as an entire experience and not just, yes, you're coming here to study, but this is also, 1, 2, 3, 4 years of your life, right? So there's life that you'll be living outside of your books, hopefully. So that's kind of where your college helps out there. I'd say in terms of funding, that's something which you do want to keep in mind. So some colleges will have the ability to fund part of your research a bit more than others. So that's something which you can keep in mind, especially if you're maybe doing something, a more research-focused graduate degree or a DPhil especially. And the other aspect that I wanted to say is, maybe looking at applying to the colleges, it's also something which you're able to start fairly early on. I think when I was doing my application, I always thought that, I have to be, really focused and really attentive while I'm doing my application. And yes, that is good. But I think with a college, it's something which you can do also a little bit more longer term, a bit more leisurely, right? So maybe after work or after your classes, and you just want to relax a bit, you can just go online, look up a college, and then just skim through the web pages, kind of see what the college is about, and kind of slowly by slowly get an idea of what each college is kind of like, and maybe which college you feel like you'll enjoy your experience more in. Of course, I would say that it's not the biggest thing, and I don't think it's gonna break your experience if you get a different college. Maybe there's a chance that you'll get into a different college than the one you applied for. So, for example, I know I applied to Linacre College, and my funding was tied to Wadham College, so I got shifted to Wadham. But I would say that so far my experience with Wadham has been amazing. It's a wonderful college, and I would say that it does offer you that support to kind of understand the college system. Again, as I said, you don't do classes within your college, but you kind of have a social home there. You also have a college advisor, and I think their role is to give you a bit more of sort of pastoral support throughout your degree. So if you need to talk to someone, maybe not necessarily based on like your research, your thesis, but kind of like how you're coping with things at Oxford. Maybe you have challenges like managing stress, time management. Those are things which you can probably talk to your college advisor about, and they'll be removed from your course. They might not be, usually I don't think they are a professor who teaches you directly. So they're just someone who you can also reach out to for additional support within the university. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we'll conclude now because we're quite a bit over time. So I think in kind of 2 lines, what are your top tips that you want to leave, things that we haven't spoken about yet? And EJ, would you go first, please?
I guess just to reiterate that first impressions matter, and really make sure you do your research before you contact people, and then you can put the best application forward. And also, I would just say that the University of Oxford is really, really keen to have more people from Africa apply, and to get more African students, graduate students in the university. And so we really welcome your applications and are really keen to help. So thanks.
Thank you very much, EJ. Nick?
So we interview quite a lot of students whilst they're on course about their experience. And I always ask them what their advice is for people who are applying. And I think that the most common one is you can't get in if you don't apply, right? And you'd be bowled over at the number of people that we've interviewed who very nearly didn't and thought they had no chance. So if you meet the entry requirements and you want to come, no, go for it.
Daniel, top tips?
From me, I'd say, yeah, take that leap of faith and apply. I know that I started my application early, but I can pinpoint the exact day that I said, in December, that I said, yes, I am going to focus on this application. It's intimidating. It can feel very daunting. You might feel, oh, I'm not good enough. I don't know enough. But, just take that leap of faith, take that chance in yourself, and just submit the best application you can. And yeah, just do the absolute best you can and let that be. Don't cancel yourself from the university.
Thank you. Morja?
I think just along the same lines as Daniel, I really think that my advice is you don't lose anything by applying. So you might as well, apart from the application fee that you have to pay for some courses, but I think that there is no reason why you should be hesitant to apply. I think that sometimes before applying, I sort of thought that was this the right thing to do? Was I qualified enough to be in Oxford? It's a prestigious university. But I think really you need to sort of believe in yourself and just put in the application, because it doesn't hurt. I know there's issues about funding, there's issues about, there's so many things to think about, but I think that the important thing is to start the process and just see how it goes from there.
And finally, to Tender.
In my case, I would say do not self-disqualify. That's really important. Do not self-disqualify. By not applying, you're self-disqualifying. And from self-disqualification, there is no more result that can come from that. Just go for it. Take a stab at it. Like, what's the worst that could happen? I mean, just apply. Like, it's definitely intimidating. I would be surprised if you're not intimidated. But if it's intimidating, then it's probably worth trying. Definitely worth trying. So just give it your best shot. If it's intimidating, that's like a signal that I need to put my best into it. Then just put your best into it. I would just like leave you with some few words that a colleague of mine once told me some time long back. He said, if it's competitive, then compete.
Thank you so much. That's the end of our Q&A today. Thank you for sticking with us to the end, even though we've gone over time a little bit. We hope that it's been useful. And thank you very much to our wonderful panel who have answered the questions today. Before we leave, I'd just like to invite you to join us to the AfOx in Saka next week, the 5th of November at 2 p.m. GMT, where we'll have a health services expert and a linguistic expert talking about their research. So that's it from AfOx today. Have a good rest of your afternoon. Thank you.
My doorbell is going.